What contracts have you signed? Whether we realize it or not, our lives are full of contracts. Not the kind written on paper necessarily, the kind written in our minds. Some are conscious, many are subconscious. And the reality is, our actions are often the result of the contracts we've signed with ourselves. Proverbs 23:7 says, "For as he thinks within himself, so he is." What you continually believe internally eventually becomes visible externally. Think about everyday life. I believe the dishes need to be done, so I do them. I believe getting up at 5 a.m. to work out is important, so I get up. I believe it's important to pick up my kids on time, so I show up. My actions reveal the contracts I've signed. But it gets deeper than that. In James 1:22, it says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." So it's not enough to know what is right. The contract has to move from knowledge to action, because every day we are making decisions about which voice gets our signature, and that takes discipline. In 1 Corinthians 9:27, it says, "I discipline my body and keep it under control." So it takes discipline to recognize the contracts that you're signing. And it takes discipline to also tear up the ones that shouldn't exist. Because here's the really hard truth. In Jeremiah 17:9, it says, "The heart, each of our hearts, is deceitful above all things." We know what is right, but often we choose something else. We write a contract for something else. You see, our emotions, our desires, our excuses, they show up and they present us yet another contract. They show up and say things like, "Oh, just this once. It's really not that bad. No one will know." And in that moment, we either sign it or we reject it. James 4:17 makes it even clearer. It says, "If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin." When God has already made something clear, neutrality really isn't an option. Choosing to not to do what God says is often choosing to sign yet a different contract. Now bring this into our regular real life. Maybe you know that movie isn't helping you walk with Christ, but you sign the contract. It's not that bad. Maybe you know scrolling social media for yet another hour is wasting time, but you sign the contract. It's not that big of a deal. It's entertaining me. I need to unplug. Maybe you know you need to have a difficult conversation with your spouse, but you sign the contract saying, it can wait. Every decision carries a contract, and it goes deeper still. We don't just sign contracts about our actions. We sign contracts really about our identity. Somewhere along the way, people sign things like, "I'm just not that disciplined. I'll never change. This is just who I am. I'm always going to struggle with this." But God never wrote those kinds of contracts. You did. And because you signed them, you started living as though they were legally binding. So here's a couple of tough examples. You linger on content, maybe on social media, that you know you shouldn't. You keep returning to things that pull your mind away from God. In a sense, you're signing a contract that says, "This is acceptable for me." But that contract is inconsistent with who God says you are. We sign contracts all the time. Some are life-giving, some are destructive, but all of them shape who we become. Romans 12:2 says, "But be transformed by the renewing of the mind." See, transformation often begins by examining the contracts you've accepted and tearing up the ones that don't align with the truth of God's words, that you may be transformed. So take a look. Look at your habits. Look at your decisions. Look at your media consumption. Look at your relationships. What contracts have you signed? Have you signed contracts that say it's okay to believe this? It's okay to ignore that. It's okay to compromise here. It's okay to stay the same. Because at the end of the day, you will live out the contracts that you've signed. The question isn't whether you've signed any. The question is, which ones came from God and which ones need to be torn up?